On a single night in 373 BCE, a thriving Greek port city of 30,000 people simply ceased to exist, and historians forgot about it for 2,000 years. Ground beneath Helike didn't rumble, it convulsed. Around midnight on a winter's evening, the earth opened in a way that survivors would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe to people who weren't there. The city sat on the Gulf of Corinth, in what's now the Peloponnese, and it was one of the wealthiest, most connected cities in all of ancient Greece. Within 4 minutes, that's the window we're talking about, an earthquake of catastrophic proportions struck. Then came the water. Let me back up. Helike wasn't some minor settlement you'd find footnoted in a geography text. This was a real power, a religious center, a naval hub, and the seat of the Achaean League, basically the closest thing Greece had to a unified political body at the time. Coins bore its name. Pilgrims traveled there. The city had temples, a harbor full of merchant ships, and a population that had grown fat on trade. By 373 BCE, Helike was arguably at its peak. The warning signs were there, if anyone had known to read them. Ancient writers, Strabo, Pausanias, Pliny, they all recorded that 4 days before the quake, the ground had trembled gently. Animals behaved strangely. The water in wells dropped suddenly. But this was 373 BCE. There was no seismology, no understanding of tectonic plates, no evacuation protocol. People interpreted these signs through the lens of religion. The guards were restless. That was the diagnosis. Then the main shock hit. The magnitude was somewhere between 7, 5, and 8. We don't know precisely because seismographs didn't exist, but the descriptions we have suggested was among the most powerful earthquakes recorded in the ancient Mediterranean. Buildings collapsed instantly. Walls crumbled. But the earthquake alone wouldn't have erased Helike from the map. What came next did. The tsunami arrived minutes later. Not a wave, waves. The Gulf of Corinth funnels water like a natural amphitheater, and when the seafloor suddenly dropped and shifted, it displaced the entire water column. Survivors reported that the sea simply vanished first. The harbor drained. Ships that had been floating moments before sat exposed on bare ground. People ran toward the exposed seabed, thinking they'd been spared. Then the water came back. The wave, or waves, because there were several, rushed back with enough force to submerge the entire city. What had been streets and markets and homes became a churning inland sea. The survivors who made it to higher ground watched their world drown. 30,000 people. Gone. Not killed necessarily in the moment, though thousands certainly were, but displaced, scattered. Their city rendered uninhabitable in the span of perhaps 10 minutes total. Here's where the story gets strange. Helike didn't recover. Other Greek cities that suffered earthquakes, Corinth for instance, rebuilt themselves. They became important again. But Helike, the survivors left. They scattered to other cities. The site was abandoned. Within a generation or two, people stopped talking about it. Within a century, Helike had slipped almost entirely from living memory. It became mythology instead of history. The ancient writers who did mention it, Strabo, Pliny, Pausanias, they treated Helike like a cautionary tale, almost a myth, a city erased by the gods. Over time, their accounts were dismissed as exaggeration. Scholars figured the stories had been embellished, that maybe a small town had flooded, but nothing on the scale described. Helike became a footnote, then a rumor, then a name that appeared only in the most comprehensive ancient geographies. Then, in the 1980, a Greek archaeologist named Demetrios Papazafeiropoulou decided to look for it. He had a hunch based on the ancient descriptions and some geological surveys. The site, he theorized, would be buried under sediment, layers of mud and silt deposited by the tsunami and subsequent river activity. He started digging near the modern town of Aegion in Achaea. What he found vindicated 2,000 years of ancient writers. Beneath the earth, preserved in anaerobic sediment, was Helike, pottery, coins, architectural remains, a harbor, all of it buried under meters of silt, exactly as the ancient sources had described. The earthquake and tsunami hadn't just destroyed the city, they'd sealed it in a time capsule. The artifacts weren't scattered or weathered. They were protected, preserved, waiting. What struck researchers most wasn't just that Helike had been real. It was that the city's destruction had been so complete and so sudden that it created a perfect snapshot of late classical Greek life. The artifacts told a story of prosperity interrupted mid-sentence. A city at its height, frozen in catastrophe. The rediscovery of Helike also vindicated ancient seismology. Or rather, It showed that ancient observers were far more accurate than modern scholars had given them credit for. Pliny's description of the harbor emptying before the wave returned. That's exactly what happens in a tsunami. The ancient writers had documented a natural disaster with remarkable precision, and for 2 millennia, historians had dismissed them as mythmakers. Today, Helike stands as a sobering reminder of how quickly civilization can be erased and how easily history itself can be forgotten. The city was so thoroughly destroyed that it took 2,000 years for anyone to believe it had existed at all. 30,000 lives, a prosperous metropolis, an entire center of Greek culture, gone in one night and then forgotten by history itself. The story of Helike matters now because it challenges what we think we know about the ancient world. If a city this significant could vanish from memory, what else have we forgotten? What other stories are buried beneath the earth, waiting for someone curious enough to dig? And it reminds us that the ancient sources, the writers we sometimes dismiss as unreliable, were often recording reality with remarkable fidelity. They just needed someone to listen. The excavations at Helike continue. New technologies, ground-penetrating radar, underwater archaeology, are slowly revealing more of the city's layout and history. Each discovery adds detail to a portrait of a civilization that the ancient world tried to remember and the modern world tried to forget. But the Earth doesn't forget, it preserves. So when you read about Helike now, when you see those artifacts in museums or read the latest papers on the excavation, you're looking at something remarkable. You're holding evidence of a catastrophe, yes, but also evidence of a thriving human community. A reminder that history isn't written in stone. Sometimes it's buried beneath it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next buried history, the stories that were lost, and the evidence that brings them back.